Chapter 9 of Legacy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peak. Legacy by James Schmitz. Chapter 9. It was really infernally bad luck. Mihul was going to be the least easy of wardens to get away from, particularly in time to catch a liner tomorrow night. Mihul knew her much too well. "Like to come along and meet your facsimile now?" Mihul inquired. She grinned. "Most people find the first time quite an experience." Trigger stood up resignedly. "All right," she said. They were being polite about it, but it was clear that it was still a cop and prisoner situation. And old friend Mihul. She remembered something then. "I believe Major Quillan has my gun." He looked at her thoughtfully, not smiling. "No," he said. "Gave it to Mihul." "That's right," said Mihul. "Let's go, kid." They went out through the door that had appeared in the wall. It closed again behind them. The facsimile stood up from behind a table at which she had been sitting as Trigger and Mihul came into the room. She gave Trigger a brief impersonal glance, then looked at Mihul. Mihul performed no introductions. "Dress, robe and scarf," she said to the facsimile. "The shoes are close enough." She turned to Trigger. "She'll be wearing your street clothes when she leaves," she said. "Could we have the dress now?" Trigger pulled the dress over her head, tossed it to Mihul, and stood in her underwear looking at her doubles slip out of her street clothes. They did seem to be a very close match in size and proportions. Watching the shifting play of slim muscles in the long legs and smooth back, Trigger decided the similarity was largely a natural one. The silver blonde hair was the same, of course. The gray eyes seemed almost identical. And the rest of the face was a little too identical. They must have used a life mask there. It was a bit uncanny, like seeing one's mirror image start moving about independently. If the girl had talked, it might have reduced the effect, but she remained silent. She put on the dress Trigger had been wearing and smoothed it down. Mihul surveyed the result. She nodded. "Perfect!" She took Trigger's robe and scarf from the back of a chair where someone had draped them and handed them over. "You won't wear the scarf," she said. "Just shove it into a pocket of the coat." The girl slung the cloak over her shoulder and stood holding the scarf. Mihul looked her over once more. "You'll do," she said. She smiled briefly. "All right." The facsimile glanced at Trigger again, turned and moved attractively out of the room. Trigger frowned. "Something wrong?" Mihul asked. She had gone over to a wall basin and was washing out a tumbler. "Why does she walk like that?" "The little swing in the rear? She studied it." Mihul half filled the tumbler with water, fished a transparent splinter of something out of a pocket, and cracked the splinter over the edge of the glass. "Among your friends, it's referred to as the RG lilt. She's got you down pat, kid." Trigger didn't comment. "Am I supposed to put on her clothes?" "No, we've got another costume for you." Mihul came over, holding out the glass. "This is for you." Trigger looked at the glass suspiciously. "What's in it?" The blue eyes regarded her mildly. "You could call it a sedative." "Don't need any. Thanks." "Better take it anyway." Mihul patted her hip with her other hand. "Little hypno gun here. That's the alternative." "What?" "That's right. Same type of charge as in your fancy Denton. Stuff in the glass is easier to take and won't leave you groggy." "What's the idea?" "I've known you quite a while," said Mihul. "And I was watching you the last 20 minutes in that room through a screen. You'll take off again if you get the least chance. I don't blame you a bit. You're being pushed around. But now it's my job to see you don't take off. And until we get where you're going, I want to be sure you'll stay quiet." She still held out the glass in a long, tanned, capable hand. She stood 3 inches taller than Trigger, weighed 35 pounds more. Not an ounce of that additional 35 pounds was fat. If she'd needed assistance, the hunting lodge was full of potential helpers. She didn't. "I never claimed I liked this arrangement," Trigger said carefully. "I did say I'd go along with it. I will. Isn't that enough?" "Sure," Mihul said promptly. "Give word of parole?" There was a long pause. "No," Trigger said. "I thought not. Drink or gun?" "Drink," Trigger said coldly. She took the glass. "How long will it put me out?" 8 to 9 hours." Mihul stood by watchfully while Trigger emptied the tumbler. After a moment, the tumbler fell to the floor. She reached out and caught Trigger as she started down. "All right," she said across her shoulder to the open doorway behind her. "Let's move." Trigger awoke and instantly went taut with tension. She lay quiet a few seconds, not even opening her eyes. There was cool sunlight on her eyelids, but she was indoors. There was a subdued murmur of sound somewhere. After a moment, she knew it came from a news viewer turned low in some adjoining room. But there didn't seem to be anybody immediately around her. Warily, she opened her eyes. She was on a couch in an airy, spacious room furnished in the palest of greens and ivory. One entire side of the room was either a window or a solidoscreen. In it was a distant mountain range with many snowy peaks, an almost cloudless blue sky. Sun at mid-morning or mid-afternoon. Sun and all had the look of Maccadon. They probably still were on the planet. That was where the interview was to take place. But she also could have been sent on a 3-day space cruise, which would be a rather good way to make sure a prisoner stayed exactly where you wanted her. This could be a spaceliner suite with a packaged view of any one of some hundreds of worlds, and with packaged sunlight thrown in. There was one door to the room. It stood open, and the news viewer talk came from there. Trigger sat up quietly and looked down at the clothes she wore. All white. A short-sleeved half-blouse of some soft, rather heavy, very comfortable, unfamiliar stuff. Bare midriff. White kid trousers which flared at the thighs and were drawn into a close fit just above the knees and down the calves, vanishing into kid boots with thick, flexible soles. Sporting outfit. That meant Maccadon. She pulled a handful of hair forward and looked at it. They'd recolored it, this time to a warm mahogany brown. She swung her legs off the couch and stood up quietly. A dozen soft steps across the springy, thick-napped turf of ivory carpet took her to the window. The news viewer clicked and went silent. "Not bad," Trigger said. She saw a long range of woodlands and open heath, rising gradually into the flanks of the mountains. On the far right was the still silver glitter of 2 lakes. "Where are we?" "Byla Uplands Game Preserve. That's the game bird area before you." Mihul appeared in the doorframe, in an outfit almost a duplicate of Trigger's, in pearl gray tones. "Feel all right?" "Feeling fine," Trigger said. Byla Uplands. The southern tip of the continent. She could make it back to Ceyce in 2 hours or less. She turned and grinned at Mihul. "I also feel hungry. How long was I out?" Mihul glanced at her wristwatch. 8 hours, 10 minutes. You woke up on schedule. I had breakfast sent up 30 minutes ago. I've already eaten mine. Took one sniff and plunged in. It's good." Mihul's hair, Trigger saw, had been cropped short and a streak of gray added over the right side. And they'd changed the color of her eyes to hazel. She wondered what had been done to her along that line. "Want to come in?" Mihul said. "We can talk while you eat." Trigger nodded. "After I've freshened up." The bathroom mirror showed they'd left her eyes alone, but there was a very puzzling impression that she was staring at an image considerably plumper, shorter, younger than it should be, a teenager around 17 or 18. Her eyes narrowed. If they'd done flesh sculpting on her, it could cause complications. She stripped hurriedly and checked. They hadn't tampered with her body, so it had to be the clothes, though it was difficult to see how even the most cunning cut could provide such a very convincing illusion of being more rounded out, heavier around the thighs, larger breasts, just missing being dumpy, in fact. She dressed again, looked again, and came out of the bathroom, still puzzled. "Choice of 3 game birds for breakfast," Mihul announced. "Never heard of any of them. All good, plus regular stuff." She patted her flat midriff. "Ate too much," she admitted. "Now dig in and I'll brief you." Trigger dug in. "I had a look at myself in the mirror," she remarked. "What's this now you see it and now you don't business of 15 or so pounds of baby fat?" Mihul laughed. "You don't really have it." "I know that too. How do they do it?" "Subcolor job in the clothes. They're not really white. Anyone looking at you gets his vision distorted a little without realizing it. Takes a wider view of certain areas, for example. You can play around with it in lots of ways." "I never heard of that one," Trigger said. "You'd think it would be sensational in fashions." "It would be. Right now it's top secret for as long as intelligence can keep it that way." Trigger chewed a savory morsel of something. "Then why did you tell me?" "You're one of the gang, however reluctant. and you're good at keeping the mouth shut.